Welcome to Reform Thinking.
Mhm.
Imagine you're driving down a busy highway. You're going, 70 miles an hour.
Right, just cruising along.
Yeah, just cruising. The radio's playing. Your mind is on, like, what you're going to have for dinner, and you're just totally relaxed.
Completely zoned out.
Totally. And suddenly, this massive semi-truck in the lane next to you just swerves into your lane. Doesn't check his blind spot at all.
Oh, man. Terrifying.
Right. So you slam your foot on the brakes, you yank the steering wheel hard to the right, and the tires are screeching as you skid onto the shoulder of the road.
And you just missed the side of that truck by what, maybe a millimeter?
Literally a millimeter. So you put the car in park, and you just sit there. I mean, your hands are shaking violently.
Your heart is pounding out of your chest?
Oh, for sure. Adrenaline is just flooding your whole system. You're sitting there trying to process this reality-altering shock of what just happened because you almost crashed.
You were a microscopic fraction of a second away from total disaster.
Yes, and here's the thing. Thousands of years ago, the ancient Hebrew language had a very specific, highly physical word for that feeling, that razor-thin margin of the almost.
It's such a striking concept when you really start digging into it, because we tend to think of biblical language in these massive, sweeping, majestic terms,
Right, yeah.
But the biblical writers had this brilliant way of using incredibly small, highly localized physical concepts to explain the most sweeping theological realities of the universe.
Okay, let's unpack this. The mission for today's deep dive is to put a magnifying glass over a single, seemingly basic biblical Hebrew word. The word is meʻaṭ.
Meʻaṭ, yeah.
And for our sources today, we are pulling from a few heavy-hitting lexical tools. Specifically, we're looking at Strong's Concordance, entry 4592, and the Theological Word Book of the Old Testament.
Which is often just called the TWOT by people who spend way too much time in seminary libraries.
Spot on. We're looking at entry 1228A in the TWOT. Now, if you listening right now aren't familiar with those tools, Strong's Concordance is basically the ultimate indexing dictionary for the Bible.
Yeah, it takes every single original Hebrew and Greek word, gives it a number, and tracks every single time it shows up.
Right, and the Theological Word Book goes even further by explaining the cultural and theological flavor of those words in the ancient Near East. So we are using these tools to see how ancient writers conceptualized smallness, scarcity, and divine pacing.
And looking at a word like this is a massive paradigm shift. I mean, if you think about the culture we live in today, we evaluate success with a baseline expectation of scale.
Oh, absolutely.
We look for exponential growth, packed stadiums, skyrocketing profit margins, viral reach.
If something is huge, our cultural default is just to assume it must be right and it must be blessed by God.
Yeah. And if something is small, well, it must be failing.
Precisely. We treat volume and size as the ultimate indicators of truth. But when you step into the biblical text, that entire framework is completely dismantled.
It really is.
The biblical writers focus all their attention on the minuscule, the overlooked, and the fragile. For you listening today, if you feel exhausted by a culture that is just obsessed with overwhelming abundance and massive scale, looking at how the biblical text treats the few or the little offers a completely different, highly liberating framework for understanding life and providence.
It really changes everything.
So we need to start with a baseline definition. What are we dealing with when we see this word meʻaṭ in the Hebrew text?
Well, we're looking at a word that appears 100 times in the Hebrew Old Testament.
100 times, okay?
Yeah, 100 times. And the primal etymological root of meʻaṭ is highly physical. It means a scraping.
A scraping.
Yes. When the Hebrew scriptures were later translated into Greek centuries before Christ, in a translation known as the Septuagint, the translators used Greek equivalents like oligos or oligostos.
And what do those mean?
They mean little, small, or slight. But that original Hebrew picture of a physical scraping is essential to hold on to.
Hang on, I want to make sure I am visualizing this correctly, because when you say a scraping, my mind immediately goes in two very different directions.
Okay, what do you mean?
On one hand, I picture scraping the bottom of a peanut butter jar. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
Like, you haven't been to the grocery store, you are desperate, you're hungry, and you take a butter knife and you're aggressively trying to scrape the very last translucent remnants of food out of the plastic grooves at the bottom of the jar.
Right, trying to get every last bit.
Yeah. It paints a picture of absolute desperation and terrifying scarcity. But on the other hand, a scraping could just be a tiny pinch of salt that a master chef deliberately scrapes off a cutting board to finish a dish.
Ah, I see the contrast.
Right. It's a tiny amount, but it is highly intentional and controlled. So in the biblical context, is Meʄaṭ primarily about desperate white-knuckle scarcity, or is it just an objective, neutral measurement of a small amount?
What's fascinating here is that the text uses it mostly as an objective, unvarnished description of reality. But it does so in a way that often highlights human frailty. It strips away our grandiosity.
Okay, how so?
To see how this works, we need to look at how the word functions structurally. The text uses it in a couple of distinct ways. First, we see it applied to mass nouns.
Let me stop you right there for a quick grammar refresher for all of us. A mass noun is something you cannot easily count individually, right?
Right, you measure it by volume or weight, like sand, water, or air. You don't say, I have 4 water.
Precisely. You measure mass nouns by their volume.
And the biblical text applies the concept of a scraping to these uncountable things. For instance, in Genesis 18.4, we have this incredible scene where Abraham is sitting by his tent near the oaks of Mamre.
Right, during the hottest part of the day.
Yeah. And 3 heavenly visitors appear. Abraham runs to meet them, bowing to the earth, offering ancient hospitality. And what does he say? He says, let a little water be brought, and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree.
And the Hebrew there.
The Hebrew literally reads, a mattock of water, a scraping of water.
Wow. And the context of that is just so heavy. I mean, Abraham is living in an arid, dusty, scorching desert environment. Water is survival.
Absolutely.
But he is deliberately downplaying his hospitality. He calls it a scraping of water, but then he turns around and commands his household to prepare a massive feast.
Yeah, he gets fine flour, he has a servant prepare a choice calf, he brings out curds and milk.
Right. He provides an absolute banquet, but he introduces it with the humble understatement of a meʄaṭ.
It is a beautiful display of hospitality. You
Yeah.
underpromise with a meʄaṭ and you overdeliver with abundance.
I love that. Do we see this with other mass nouns?
We do. We see another use in Genesis 43.11. Israel, also known as Jacob, is facing a severe, life-threatening famine.
Oh, right. The famine in Canaan.
Yeah. His sons have to go back to Egypt to buy grain, and they have to face the stern ruler of Egypt, who, unbeknownst to them, is actually their long-lost brother, Joseph.
Such a tense moment in the narrative.
Very tense. Jacob is terrified of this ruler. So he tells his sons to take a present to appease him. He says, take some of the choice fruits of the land in your bags and carry a present down to the man, a little balm and a little honey, gum, myrrh, pistachio nuts, and almonds.
And he uses the word there.
Yes. Again, he says, a meat of balm, a scraping of ointment.
See, that one sounds much more like the desperate peanut butter jar analogy. Jacob is quite literally scraping together whatever meager agricultural remnants are left in a famine-stricken land to try and save his family's life.
Yeah.
It is a scraping of survival.
It really is. So we have mass nouns, but then the linguistic application broadens, and we see meʄaṭ applied to count nouns.
Things you can individually number and point to?
Right. In 1 Samuel 17.28, we find the story of David and Goliath. David, who is just a youth, goes to the battle lines where the Israelite army is cowering in fear of the Philistine champion.
And David's oldest brother, Eliab, is burning with anger that David even showed up.
Exactly. Eliab mocks him in front of the soldiers. He asks, why have you come down? And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? He calls them a meʄaṭ of sheep.
Oh, man. That is such a cutting insult in an agrarian society. Eliab is not just pointing out a small number. He is actively dismissing David's entire livelihood and identity.
He's totally belittling him.
Yeah, he is essentially saying, you are a nobody who watches over a scraping of an inheritance. Go back to your insignificant little flock and leave the real war to the adults. Eliab weaponizes the concept of meʄaṭ to try and humiliate his younger brother.
He absolutely weaponizes it. But then the text takes this concept of accountable scraping and applies it to human beings on a national scale.
A national scale, where is that?
In Deuteronomy 26.5, there is a very famous grammatical construction. It is a construct phrase. In Hebrew grammar, a construct phrase links 2 nouns together so closely that they function almost like a single idea, usually translated with the word of in between them. The phrase is meʄaṭ.
Meʄaṭ. What does that literally translate to?
It translates to men of fewess. Moses is instructing the Israelites on the liturgy they must recite when they finally enter the Promised Land and offer their first fruits to God.
Okay, so it's a liturgical declaration.
Right. They are commanded to stand before the altar and declare their history aloud. They have to say, a wandering Aramean was my father, and he went down into Egypt and sojourned there, few in number.
Wow.
That phrase few in number is Meʿaṭ, a scraping of people.
They are confessing that their entire massive nation, which now numbers in the millions and is poised to conquer Canaan, began as a mere scraping of 70 individuals who sought refuge in Egypt.
Yes. It is an intentional liturgical practice of remembering their own smallness. They are mandated to never forget that their origins were a Meʄt.
That is a vital point. The liturgy prevents historical amnesia.
For sure. But perhaps the most striking use of this objective reality check regarding count nouns is found in Genesis 47.9.
Okay, back to Genesis.
We are back with Jacob. He has finally been reunited with Joseph, and he is brought in to stand before Pharaoh, the most powerful monarch on the face of the earth.
What a beating that must have been.
Yeah. Pharaoh looks at this ancient, weathered patriarch and asks a simple question. How many are the days of the years of your life?
And Jacob replies,
Jacob says, the days of the years of my sojourning are 130 years. Few and evil have been the days of the years of my life, and they have not attained to the days of the years of the life of my fathers in the days of their sojourning.
wow.
He calls his 130 years, Meʄaṭ, a scraping.
Wait, I need to push back on Jacob's attitude here. Is he just being falsely modest? Or is he actually depressed?
It's a fair question.
Because calling 130 years few and evil sounds less like a holy, enlightened perspective and more like a bitter, exhausted old man complaining to a king. 130 years feels like a massive expanse of time to anyone.
Right. It's a huge amount of time. It is a fair question to ask about his psychological state. I mean, Jacob has certainly endured an immense amount of trauma.
Oh, totally.
He fled from his murderous brother Esau. He labored under his deceptive uncle Laban for 2 decades. His beloved wife Rachel died in childbirth.
His daughter Dinah was assaulted.
Yes. He spent years believing his favorite son Joseph was torn to pieces by wild animals, and he has just survived a catastrophic famine. So the evil or difficult aspect of his days is an undeniable objective reality.
But calling 130 years few, a Meʄt, that's the part that catches me.
Well, it is not just depression. It is an incredibly sober assessment of human mortality when placed against the backdrop of eternity, or even just against the lifespans of his ancestors like Abraham and Isaac.
That is staggering.
Yeah.
Jacob looks back at over a century of life, a life packed with cosmic wrestling matches with angels, raising 12 patriarchs who would become the tribes of Israel, accumulating massive wealth and enduring brutal hardships.
Yeah.
He looks at this incredibly dense, monumental life, and he assesses it as just a scraping. It completely reorients how you view your own lifespan.
It puts a hard limit on human grandiosity.
It really does. Think about how much energy we spend trying to build legacies. We obsess over accumulating decades of accomplishments, climbing corporate ladders, building our portfolios, leaving our mark on the world.
We want to be remembered.
Right. We want our lives to be an epic, sprawling novel. And the biblical lens comes in and reduces our grandest ambitions and our longest lives to a mere scraping. It is deeply humbling. But at the same time, it provides an incredibly realistic baseline for human existence.
Oh, so.
Well, if you are listening to this on your morning commute and you are stressing out because you feel like you are falling behind in life, you haven't built a massive legacy, your bank account isn't huge, your influence feels microscopic, Jacob's perspective takes all the pressure off.
That's a really good point.
There's a strange, wild comfort in realizing that even the patriarchs, the literal founders of the faith, viewed their monumental lives as a mere Meʄt. You are not expected to be infinite. You're only expected to live your scraping of time faithfully. You are a Meʄt, and that is entirely okay because the burden of scale does not rest on your shoulders.
That is a brilliant synthesis. It takes the pressure off the individual and redirects our focus from our own magnitude to God's providence.
Yes.
The burden of scale belongs to God alone. And this realization bridges us perfectly into the second major category of how this Hebrew word operates.
Okay, where are we going next?
We just looked at how Meʄaṭ modifies nouns, water, balm, sheep, people, years. But Meʄaṭ also functions heavily as an adjective.
Oh, interesting.
It describes identity and it frames instructions. This adjectival use builds a robust, comprehensive theology of smallness.
I am fascinated by this. How does smallness become a theology?
Let's look at the mechanics of the language in Deuteronomy 7.7. This text outlines the very nature of God's sovereign choice, which is an absolute core concept in understanding biblical history.
Right.
Moses is standing before the Israelites, preaching to them before they cross the Jordan River. He wants to ensure they understand exactly why God chose them out of all the nations on earth.
And what does he tell them?
He says, "It was not because you were more in number than any other people that the Lord set his love on you and chose you, for you are the fewest of all peoples."
Wow.
The Hebrew word Moses uses for the fewest is Meʄaṭ. It is our word with a definite article attached. You were the scraping.
I have always loved the sheer bluntness of that text. God explicitly says to them, look, I did not pick you because you had the biggest army. I did not pick you because your economy was booming, or because your culture was sophisticated, or because your population statistics were off the charts.
Quite the opposite, really.
Yeah, God intentionally bypasses the massive, terrifying empires of the ancient world. He walks right past the Egyptians with their pyramids and chariots. He bypasses the Assyrians and the Babylonians. He zeroes in on the absolute bottom of the geopolitical barrel, the Meʄaṭ.
Exactly. And we have to ask why. Why does God operate this way?
Because it defies all human logic. Human logic, political strategy, and corporate wisdom all dictate that you ally yourself with the strong.
Right. You want to be on the winning team.
You merge with the company that has the biggest market share. You draft the biggest, fastest athletes to your team. You bet on the highest probability of success based on raw numbers and resources. But God's sovereign choice intentionally falls on the smallest, the weakest, the most improbable candidate.
The theological mechanism at work here is the preservation of divine glory. By intentionally choosing the Meʄaṭ, God permanently removes any possibility of human boasting.
Oh, that makes total sense.
Right. If God chose the Egyptian empire to accomplish his redemptive purposes, the Egyptians would inevitably say, look at what our chariots and our brilliant military strategies accomplished.
They would take all the credit.
100%. By choosing a scraping of formerly enslaved nomads, when the victory comes, the glory cannot logically be attributed to the strength of the people. It must be attributed solely to the sovereign strength of God.
It is the ultimate safeguard against human arrogance. And the text does not just apply this to national identity. It filters down into how we individually relate to God.
I'm thinking about Ecclesiastes 5.1. Yes, the posture of the individual before the divine. The writer of Ecclesiastes gives a strict instruction about how to approach the temple, how to approach God in prayer.
What does he say?
He writes, "Be not rash with your mouth, nor let your heart be hasty to utter a word before God, for God is in heaven and you are on earth. Therefore, let your words be few."
And the Hebrew word there.
The Hebrew word used there is miatim, which is the plural form of meʄaṭ, a scraping of words.
Hang on, I want to pause on that Ecclesiastes verse. Let your words be few. The cultural contrast here is blinding.
Oh, completely.
We live in an era where everyone is heavily incentivized to broadcast every single thought they have, every unformed opinion, every emotional reaction to the entire globe at all times.
Social media is built on it.
Right. Social media trains us to produce an endless avalanche of words. We are drowning in a sea of hot takes and commentary. Yet the biblical posture for approaching the sovereign creator of the universe is to bring a meʄaṭ of words.
It is a radical limitation on our self-expression.
It is, because it is rooted in a recognition of reality. The text says, God is in heaven and you are on earth. It is contrasting the massive, infinite, all-knowing reality of God with our highly localized, ignorant, limited reality on a tiny speck of dust called Earth.
When you really see that gap, it changes things.
When you actually comprehend that gap, the only sane response is to shut your mouth and offer a scraping of words. It makes me think about the spiritual discipline of embracing meʄaṭ in our modern lives. What would it look like for you, the listener, to intentionally practice this?
How do you envision that practice?
It means actively deciding to speak less. It means resisting the urge to have an opinion on every internet controversy. But it also applies to how we accept providence in hard times. Think about Daniel 11.34.
Ah, yes.
This is a prophetic text dealing with a period of intense, brutal persecution for the people of God. And the text says that when they stumble, they shall receive a little help, and ezer meʄaṭ.
That is a very difficult text for people to swallow. When you are facing intense persecution or intense suffering, you do not want an ezer meʄaṭ.
No, not at all.
You do not want a scraping of help. You want a dramatic, skies ripping open, permanent deliverance.
Precisely. When we are in pain, we demand the massive miracle. We want the instant fix. But the discipline of meʄaṭ means learning to accept the little help.
Yeah.
It means being grateful for the tiny fraction of relief God provides on a Tuesday afternoon that just barely gets you through to Wednesday morning.
Yeah.
It means resting in the unshakable reality that God consistently works through the smallest groups, the quietest moments, and the scrapings of our efforts.
Which brings up a very natural question about the mechanics of providence.
Hmm.
If God prefers to work through the small, the few, and the minimal, how does he manage the timeline of these events? Small things usually take a long time to produce massive results.
Right. An oak tree grows from a tiny acorn, but you have to wait decades to see the shade.
Exactly. I mean, spot on. So we need to look at the third section of our analysis, the adverbial uses of Meӓt.
Adverbs now.
Yeah, how does this word modify actions in terms of space, degree, and time? The lexical sources show a fascinating variety. If we look at space, 2 Samuel 16.1 describes King David fleeing from his usurping son Absalom.
A very dark time in David's life.
Very dark. The text says David passed over the summit of the Mount of Olives, a little past the top. It measures physical distance.
A scraping of distance.
Right. Then, in terms of degree, we have a highly sarcastic use in 2 Kings 10.8.
I love the sarcasm in the historical books. What happens here?
Jehu is orchestrating a plot to wipe out the worshippers of the false god Baal. He calls all the prophets of Baal together and falsely claims he's going to worship Baal even more than his predecessor.
It's a total trap.
A total trap. He says Ahab served the Baal a little, but Jehu will serve him much. He uses Meӓt to set up a contrast with a massive, deadly amount.
He calls the previous idolatry a mere scraping to lull the false prophets into a false sense of security before he springs the trap. That is brilliant political manipulation.
It is highly effective. But while the spatial and degree uses are interesting, the temporal uses, the references to time, are where the theological tension really spikes. Time is the crucible of faith.
Time is absolutely where we feel our lack of control the most. If you are waiting for a medical test result, or waiting for a job offer, or waiting for a prodigal child to return, a single minute can feel like a decade. Time stretches out and tortures us.
The biblical writers understood that psychological torture perfectly. Look at Job 24.24.
Oh, Job knows all about waiting.
Yeah.
No.
Job is in the middle of his horrific suffering, and he is lamenting the fact that wicked people seem to prosper while righteous people suffer. But he anchors himself with a temporal truth. He says the wicked are exalted for a short time, a Meӓt, and then they are gone, brought low and gathered up like heads of grain.
So the injustice is only given a scraping of time.
That is the comfort of a short time. But what about when a short time induces panic?
Oh, that's a different feeling entirely.
That is the contrast I want to draw. Look at Exodus 17.4. Moses is leading the massive Israelite congregation through the scorching wilderness. They arrive at Rephidim, and there is no water for the people to drink.
Which, again, in the desert is a full-blown emergency.
It is. The people begin quarreling with Moses, demanding water, and their grumbling turns hostile. Moses turns to God in absolute, unvarnished panic and cries out, "What shall I do with this people? They are almost ready to stone me."
Almost ready.
But the Hebrew literally reads, "Yet a little more, an odd Meӓt, and they will stone me."
Here's where it gets really interesting. Moses is terrified of the little time ahead of him. To Moses, Meӓt represents an impending crisis. He is looking at the mob, he is looking at his invisible watch, and he is thinking, I only have a tiny fraction of time left, a scraping of seconds before everything falls apart, and I am murdered by my own people.
It's pure panic.
He views the small margin of time as a ticking time bomb.
That is the human reaction to scarcity of time.
Oh.
But God uses that exact same concept of a tiny fraction of time in a completely opposing way.
Oh.
God introduces a doubled phrasing of our word, Meӓt, Meӓt. It translates to little by little or gradually. We see this distinct phrasing in Exodus 23.3 and Deuteronomy 7.22.
So what is the context for Meӓt, Meӓt?
The Israelites are receiving instructions about how they're going to conquer the Promised Land. They know there are massive, fortified Canaanite cities and armies standing in their way. God tells them how he is going to drive out the enemy nations.
And what's the strategy?
In Exodus 23, God says, "I will not drive them out from before you in 1 year, lest the land become desolate and the wild beasts multiply against you. Little by little, Meӓt, Meӓt, I will drive them out from before you until you have increased and possessed the land."
Wow. That text flies directly in the face of how human beings want God to operate.
Doesn't it?
I mean, if I am an Israelite soldier standing on the dusty border of Canaan, looking at heavily armed giants and fortified cities, I want the enemies eradicated on day one. I want a massive, instantaneous, skies-opening miracle.
Drop fire from heaven.
Yes. Drop fire from heaven, wipe them all out by Tuesday, and let us move into the empty houses by Wednesday.
That is the human demand for efficiency.
But God says, no. I am not going to give you an instantaneous victory. Because if I remove the opposition all at once, the ecological balance of the land will collapse. God is thinking about things the Israelites haven't even considered.
He sees the whole board.
He knows that if he empties all the cities in 1 year, the Israelites do not have the population density to maintain the farmland. The fields will become overgrown, the infrastructure will crumble, and the wild predators, lions, bears, wolves, will multiply and overrun the empty territory.
It would be a disaster.
The instantaneous miracle they are begging for would actually result in their own destruction. So God institutes a strict policy of Meʿaṭ, little by little, a scraping by a scraping.
If we pull back and look at the theological mechanics here, we see a striking contrast between human panic and divine pacing. Moses panics because he feels the crush of a little time. He thinks a small amount of time equals disaster. But God operates through little by little because he sees the long game. God uses little by little as a deliberate method of sustainable preservation.
It makes me think of restoring an old, dilapidated house.
Oh, I like that.
When you buy a fixer-upper, you watch all these home renovation shows where they gut the whole thing and rebuild it in a 45-minute episode.
Yeah, the TV magic.
Right. You want your house to look like a magazine cover by the end of the week. You want to walk in with a sledgehammer and knock down a massive wall to open up the floor plan instantly. But if you do that without understanding the engineering of the house, you might knock down a load-bearing wall, and the entire roof is going to cave in and crush you.
You can't skip steps.
You cannot rush the structural integrity. You have to work Meʄaṭ. You replace one beam on Monday. You pour a tiny section of concrete to stabilize the foundation on Wednesday. You do the tedious, unseen, fractional work for months.
That is an excellent way to visualize the physical reality of the text.
Or think about recovering from a major physical trauma. Let's say you shatter your femur in a car crash. You undergo surgery, they put a titanium rod in your leg, and you wake up. You cannot jump off the hospital bed and go run a marathon.
No, you wouldn't make it 2 steps.
If you try to rush the healing, if you demand instant, massive progress, you will snap the bone again and permanently destroy the healing process. You have to go to physical therapy. And physical therapy is the absolute definition of Meʄaṭ.
It really is.
You suffer through an hour of agonizing pain just to gain a 1/4 inch of improved range of motion in your knee. It is infuriatingly slow. It feels like a scraping of progress. But that sudden, massive change you want would actually cause the biological structure to collapse.
Absolutely. And that physical therapy analogy maps perfectly onto what God is doing to the land of Canaan, and more importantly, what he does in the spiritual lives of individuals.
Oh, bring that home for us.
Well, the theological concept of sanctification, the process of being made holy, is almost exclusively a Meʄaṭ process. We pray for instant patience. We pray for instant freedom from our habitual sins. We pray for instant miraculous relief from our daily trials. We want the overnight renovation.
God, take away my anxiety right this second.
Right. But God's providence often dictates a Meʄaṭ progression. He gives us just enough grace for today, just a scraping of strength to get through the next hour, because he knows our frame.
He knows what we can handle.
Yes. He knows that if he gave us the entire inheritance of holiness all at once, or if he instantly removed all our struggles, we would not be able to handle it. We would become overwhelmingly arrogant, self-reliant, and complacent.
The wild beasts?
Exactly. The wild beasts of our own sinful inclinations and pride would multiply and overtake our souls. So he drives out our flaws, and he builds our character, little by little.
A scraping by a scraping. Man. So we have seen Meʄaṭ as a physical measurement, as a theological identifier of the small, and as the steady, deliberate pacing of God. But the biblical text does not just use this word to comfort us about our smallness. It uses it to actively confront us about our sin.
Yes. This is where the linguistic study takes a much darker turn.
Let us move into the grammar of confrontation. I want you to explain this to me like I am a 5-year-old, because the Hebrew language can do things with a single letter that take us entire sentences to accomplish in English. When the ancient writers attached a specific prefix to the front of this word, the meaning shifted drastically.
Yes, we are talking about the interrogative he. In the Hebrew alphabet, the letter he makes an H sound. When you attach this letter to the front of a word with specific vowel pointing, it functions like a grammatical flag.
Okay, a flag for what?
It signals to the reader that the word is no longer a statement, it is now a question. It is like putting a question mark at the beginning of a sentence in Spanish.
Okay, so you take the word Meʄaṭ, meaning a little or a scraping, and you attach the interrogative he to the front, and you get the word hamat.
Correct. And hamat translates to, is it too little? Or was it a small thing? Or was it not enough? It takes the concept of a small amount and turns it into a rhetorical question.
That's a big shift.
It is. This single grammatical shift changes the word from a statement of fact into a piercing interrogation of the human heart.
Let's look at what that actually looks like in the text. I'm looking at Genesis 30.15. This is the story of the bitter, heartbreaking rivalry between Jacob's two wives, the sisters Rachel and Leah.
A very messy family dynamic.
Very messy. They are locked in this awful competition to bear sons for Jacob. Rachel is barren for a long time while Leah has multiple sons. One day, Leah's son Reuben finds mandrakes in the field, which is a plant believed in the ancient world to promote fertility, and brings them to his mother Leah.
And Rachel sees this.
Yes. Rachel sees this and desperately asks Leah for some of the mandrakes. And Leah just snaps at her. Leah replies, "Is it a small matter that you have taken away my husband? Would you take away my son's mandrakes also?" The phrase, "is it a small matter," is Meʄaṭ.
The translation could literally read, "Was your taking my husband too little?" Leah is accusing Rachel of insatiable greed.
Wow.
She is saying, you already have the primary affection and love of our husband. Was that massive privilege just a scraping to you? Is it so insignificant that you now have to steal my son's fertility plants as well?
It exposes an incredibly ugly dynamic, and we see this exact same word used on a massive national scale in number 16.
Korah's rebellion.
Right. Korah is a Levite, which means he already possesses immense sacred privilege. The Levites were the only tribe permitted to dismantle, carry, and set up the holy tabernacle. They handled the sacred items. But Korah isn't satisfied.
He wants more.
He gathers a mob and leads an insurrection against Moses and Aaron, demanding to be elevated to the role of the priesthood, which was reserved exclusively for Aaron's family. Moses confronts Korah and asks him a devastating question.
Moses says in verses 9 and 10, "Is it too small a thing for you that the God of Israel has separated you from the congregation of Israel to bring you near to himself, to do service in the tabernacle of the Lord, and do you seek the priesthood also?"
Is it too small a thing, Meʄaṭ? Moses is holding up a mirror to Korah's ambition. He is saying, Korah, you have been given a holy task that angels would marvel at. You get to carry the furniture of the dwelling place of the living God. And you look at that staggering, mind-bending privilege and you call it a meʄaṭ, you call it a scraping. You view it as too little.
It is the ultimate diagnostic question for the human soul.
I have to ask, does this rhetorical question ever function positively in the biblical text? Is there ever a time someone asks Meʄaṭ to say, wow, is this tiny thing really all it takes? Or is it always an accusation?
It is almost exclusively an accusation. The biblical authors use Meʄaṭ as a divine and prophetic mirror to expose human entitlement and ingratitude.
Do we see it in the prophets?
We do. Let's look at Isaiah 7.13. The prophet Isaiah is speaking to King Ahaz. Ahaz is an incredibly wicked king of Judah who is refusing to trust God in the face of an invading army.
So he puts on a show.
Right. He puts on this fake show of false piety, claiming he doesn't want to test God. Isaiah sees right through the hypocrisy and says, "Hear then, O house of David. Is it too little for you to weary men, that you weary my God?" Also, he uses Meʄaṭ.
Wow.
Is it a scraping to you to exhaust human patience, that you now feel the need to exhaust the patience of the Almighty?
That is terrifying.
And it gets even heavier. Look at the chilling words of Ezekiel 16.20. God is using graphic marital imagery to confront the city of Jerusalem for the horrific, unspeakable sin of idolatry, which had devolved into actual child sacrifice to false gods.
Horrific.
God asks Jerusalem, "Was your whoring too small a matter that you slaughtered my children and delivered them up as an offering by fire to them?" The phrase "too small a matter" is Meʄaṭ.
God is asking, was breaking the covenant and worshiping pieces of carved wood too small a sin for you? Was that just a scraping of rebellion so you had to escalate to murdering your own children? Those are incredibly heavy texts.
They are brutally heavy. But if we connect this to the bigger picture of biblical theology, we see a consistent, terrifying pattern in human history.
What's the pattern?
Sin very often begins by looking at immense, staggering blessings. Things that should prompt unending, weeping gratitude, and internally categorizing them as meʄaṭ. It is the lie that says, "This is too little, I deserve more."
Wait, that is the exact lie from the Garden of Eden?
Yes, absolutely.
Think about the opening pages of Genesis. God creates Adam and Eve, and he gives them the entire globe. He gives them every fruit-bearing tree, every river, every animal, and most importantly, perfect, unhindered communion with himself in the cool of the day.
They have everything.
They have absolute, unfathomable abundance. But the serpent slithers in and convinces them to look at the one single restricted tree in the middle of the garden and decide that the entirety of the rest of the garden was Meʄaṭ.
The serpent introduces the interrogative hail into the human mind. Is it too little?
Yes. The serpent essentially whispers, is it too little that God gave you everything else? You are missing out. God is holding out on you. You need the fruit from this tree too. Adam and Eve look at massive, infinite grace and call it a scraping.
And Korah does the exact same thing in the wilderness.
Right. He looks at his sacred calling and calls it a scraping. It is not enough. I want the glory of the high priest.
And this is where the doctrine of human depravity becomes so visible and so practical. As fallen humans, we are fundamentally wired to diminish the grace we receive and aggressively inflate the rights we think we deserve. The mirror of Meʿaṭ forces us to look at our own baseline of contentment.
This is a question you can literally take into your kitchen right now. How often do you look at significant provisions in your life? Your physical health, the fact that you have a roof over your head, your family, your job, the simple, miraculous fact that your lungs are autonomously pulling in oxygen while you listen to this, and internally ask, is it too little?
We do it all the time.
We treat the massive, unmerited grace of God as if it were a meager, insulting scraping, all because we are fixated on the one thing we do not have yet. We are angry about the promotion we didn't get, or the square footage our house doesn't have, or the vacation we can't afford. It is a terrifying, destructive habit of the human heart. And this one tiny Hebrew word captures the psychology of it perfectly.
It really does. The linguistic precision of biblical Hebrew is unmatched in how it dissects human motivation. Now, we need to look at the final major grammatical variation of this word, which brings us to the edge of the cliff.
The edge of the cliff. Let's go.
We have looked at nouns, adjectives, adverbs, and rhetorical questions. Finally, we must examine what happens when the prefix kaf is added to the word.
Okay, explain it like I'm 5 again. What does the kaf prefix do?
The Hebrew letter kaf makes a K sound. When it is attached to the front of noun as a prefix, it functions as a preposition of comparison. It translates as like or as.
So you take the word me, meaning a scraping, and you attach the kaf to the front, and you get the word kimat.
Right. Literally translated, kimat means like a little or like a scraping. But conceptually, the way it functions in a sentence, it translates to words like almost, nearly, scarcely, or quickly. It deals entirely with the unrealized action.
Yeah, unrealized action. I love that. So if an event is like a scraping, it means the event was so incredibly close to happening that only a microscopic, razor-thin layer of reality separated you from it. Hence, almost.
Yes.
It is the truck swerving into your lane that we talked about at the beginning. You almost crashed.
Precisely. Let's look at some textual examples where this spatial or temporal proximity is highlighted. In Genesis 26:9, we see Isaac repeating the exact same cowardly sin his father Abraham committed.
Oh, passing off his wife as his sister.
Oh, yeah. Isaac moves to the land of Gerar, and he is terrified that the men of the city will murder him to steal his beautiful wife, Rebekah. So he lies and says, she is my sister. Abimelech, the Philistine king, eventually looks out a window and sees Isaac showing marital affection to Rebekah, and he realizes he has been lied to.
He figures it out pretty quick.
He calls Isaac in and is absolutely horrified. Abimelech rebukes him, saying, "What is this you have done of us? One of the people almost lay with your wife, and you would have brought guilt upon us." The text uses kimat.
Abimelech realizes that the entire nation was a scraping away from committing a horrific sin and bringing divine wrath upon their heads. The tragedy was averted by the narrowest of margins.
Yes, the disaster was kimat. We see a different emotional tone in the Song of Solomon 3.4. The bride has been desperately searching for her groom in the dangerous city streets at night. She asks the watchman where he is.
And what happens?
She says, "Scarcely had I passed them when I found him whom my soul loves." The word scarcely is kimat.
In that context, it means she was only a scraping of distance or a scraping of time past the guards when she finally experienced the joy of finding him.
Right. We also see it used to describe terrifying speed. In Psalm 2, the psalmist warns earthly kings and rulers to submit to the sovereign God. Verse 12 warns them to kiss the Son, lest he be angry and they perish in the way, for his wrath is quickly kindled.
Quickly kindled.
The word is kimat. It means God's judgment can flash into existence in a mere scraping of time. And in Proverbs 10.20, we see it used as a statement of comparative worthlessness. The text says, "The tongue of the righteous is choice silver. The heart of the wicked is of little worth."
Let me guess, the word is kimat.
You got it. Literally, the wicked heart is kimat. It amounts to nothing more than a scraping.
So kimat governs the space of the almost. It governs the near misses, the split-second timing, and the narrow escapes. Think back to that physical sensation of the near car crash. You pull over, your hands are shaking, and you realize you're a fraction of a second away from a life-altering tragedy.
Averted only by factors completely outside your control.
That is what Meʄaṭ is. It is the terrifying proximity to ruin, averted only by an invisible intervening hand.
That invisible intervening hand is the core theological point. And this brings us to perhaps the most vital use of this word in the entire Old Testament.
Oh, where is that?
In Isaiah 1.9, the prophet is describing the utter devastation of the nation of Judah because of their persistent, unrepentant rebellion against God. The country has been ravaged by foreign armies. Their cities are burned with fire. The land is stripped bare. It looks like absolute final annihilation.
Like the end of the line.
But Isaiah writes this sentence: "If the Lord of hosts had not left us a few survivors, we should have been like Sodom and become like Gomorrah."
Okay, where is our word in that text?
The phrase translated "a few survivors" or "a very small remnant" is serid kimet, literally a remnant that is like a scraping.
So what does this all mean? When you pull all these threads together, you realize that the ongoing survival of God's people constantly hangs on a Meʄaṭ.
It hangs on a razor's edge.
A tiny, microscopically small remnant. It proves that deliverance relies entirely, 100%, on divine mercy. It does not rely on human mass. It does not rely on brilliant military strategy. It does not rely on our own moral merit.
No, it doesn't.
If God the Father had not actively, sovereignly intervened to preserve that tiny scraping of a remnant, the entire nation of Judah would have been completely eradicated, wiped off the map forever, just like Sodom and Gomorrah.
It is the ultimate display of divine sovereignty. The concept of the almost highlights the terrifying perfection of God's timing and his preservation. He allows the situation to reach the absolute sheer edge of the cliff, the Meʄaṭ, so that when the salvation finally arrives, it is absolutely undeniable who orchestrated it.
Man cannot take credit for surviving the Meʄaṭ.
No, we cannot.
This has been a truly staggering process of unraveling this word. Let's synthesize what we have covered today. We started with the primal, physical definition from the concordances. Meʄaṭ, a literal scraping. We saw it in the humble offer of a little water for heavenly visitors, the desperate gathering of a little balm during a deadly famine.
A few sheep mocked by an angry brother.
Right, and the realization that even a dense 130-year lifespan is just a scraping of time against the backdrop of eternity.
From there, we examined how smallness forms a theology of identity. God intentionally identifies his chosen people as the Meʄaṭ, the fewest and smallest. He completely rejects the human assumption that bigger is always stronger.
And we saw the wisdom of bringing only a few words, a scraping of speech, before the infinite majesty of God in heaven.
Then we looked at the deliberate pacing of providence. While humans panic because our time feels terrifyingly short, crying out, "Yet a little and they will stone me," God operates in the steady, sustainable, structural rhythm of Meʄaṭ, little by little.
We confronted the dark, entitled Mirror of Our Own Hearts, with the interrogative Meʄaṭ, is it too little? Exposing our deeply ingrained tendency to view massive, unmerited grace with ungrateful entitlement, just like Adam and Eve and Korah.
And finally, we stood on the absolute edge of the cliff with Meʄaṭ, the space of the almost. We recognize that our very existence, our ongoing preservation, and our salvation often hang by the thinnest of threads, preserved solely by the sheer unmerited mercy of God choosing to leave a small remnant.
This brings us to a final thought for you to carry with you as you go back to your day. Modern society constantly, aggressively trains us to despise the small. We are conditioned by algorithms and corporate ladders to eradicate the slow, to panic at the concept of scarcity, and to demand everything in maximum volume right this very second.
We want it all right now.
We want the flood, we hate the scraping, we want the overnight renovation, we hate the physical therapy. But what if God's most significant acts in history and his most crucial character-building work in your individual life are entirely restricted to the category of Meʄaṭ?
That's a challenging thought.
What if looking only for the massive, the loud, and the instantaneous is actually causing you to miss the divine scraping that is right in front of you?
That is the ultimate challenge of the biblical text, to find the providence of God not just in the parting of the Red Sea or the fire falling from heaven, but in the slow, fractional, little-by-little preservation of our seemingly ordinary days.
Next time you feel like you only have a scraping of energy, a scraping of faith, or a scraping of time left, do not panic and do not despise it. Remember that in the biblical framework, a scraping is exactly the material God uses to accomplish his sovereign will. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We will see you next time.